All right, well, get the guns, get the supplies, get the kids, throw them in the car, head off into the hills because nuclear war is imminent. North Korea, how is that for a histrionic headline? Nuclear war is imminent. Could you imagine a headline like that even 5 years ago? People would be rioting in the streets if that was a headline put out by NBC or CNN. Now, this was put out by a rather prominent media agency, a second-tier agency, if you will, one that we probably would refer to as propagandistic here in the West. But make no mistake, there is some substance to these claims. This is not run-of-the-mill North Korean rhetoric. There is something else here going on. And I want you guys to know that if this is the end of days, that it's been a slice. It's been great knowing you, well, in this parasocial sort of way, knowing you. And I just hope that you've really taken this preparedness thing seriously. Because I can assure you that anybody in a prominent position within society, anybody with half a functioning brain cell and a little disposable income in the bank has a plan. They might not tell you they have a plan, but boy, do they have a plan. There's one thing that I can say beyond a shadow of a doubt, that any intelligent person with money in the bank is prepping. So why then the stigma against preparedness? Well, and if you're wondering what's going on in the world, we're going to talk about the headlines, but I got to say this because it's very important that people realize this. Every influential person that I've met and networked with through this channel, who I would consider above average intelligence and a person maybe of modest means and above who has some disposable income, they all have a plan. That doesn't mean that preparedness is the focal point of their existence, but they have a plan. Case in point, Kim Kardashian, she has a plan. She's got a bug out location, she's got bunker, she's got security. She's got a plan. And I know a lot of people would relegate her to not being somebody of above average intelligence, but there are rumors that she's actually more intelligent than you think. Anyways, something to consider is that while the media is saying that preparedness is for Looney Tunes, understand and don't be beguiled by this mockery of preparedness. Because I'm starting to think that the reason why they do that is the same reason why they mock people who buy gold. And it's the same people why they ridicule, the gold bugs, like the Peter Schiffs. Because they want to hoard all the gold for themselves at the lowest possible prices. And if everybody is reaching out to Ron at Atlas Survival Shelters saying, hey, build me a bunker, if all the common men are saying, build us bunkers, then Ron can't build the bunkers for the elite people, right? The people in positions of power. So a lot of the stigma, it's not real because anybody in a position of power and influence has a bug out plan. They're preparing for this. Again, it's not the focal point of their existence. It's not like me day in and day out talking about prepping. No. They get their plan, they paper the problem over in whatever way they have to, and then they go about their life. But they do have a plan. So the idea that this is fantasy land, this is beyond the realm of possibility is just asinine. It absolutely, and if you haven't had enough confirmation yet in the last 5 years, crises after crises, black swan after black swan. I walked out of the house this morning and I was hit with a wave, like a wall of smoke. Okay, forest fire smoke. Any other day probably would have been national news. Major Canadian city inundated with forest fire smoke, air quality index at very low levels. Any other day would have been record news, not in 2023. Not in a year where we've seen more area burned in terms of forest fires than the entire size of the country of England already in the year, and the fire season's only about 65% finished. So day after day, we're seeing these unprecedented events. The term unprecedented doesn't even do it justice anymore because everything is unprecedented nowadays. And we're in the age of consequences. So you gotta have a plan. You gotta take this stuff Seriously, you don't need any more confirmation. If you've watched this channel for more than a week, I've given you 101 reasons why you should prep. And part of the reason why we're doing this new celebrity short series where we rank people on their apocalypse survivability, notable figures, we've rated people like Joe Rogan, Bill Gates, the Barbie chick, what's her name, Margot Robbie, people like that. The reason why we're doing that is to show people that it doesn't necessarily matter how much money you have. You can be the richest man in the world and still score low. You know, backwoods Billy might have a better chance of surviving the end of the world as we know it than some of the most notable figures out there. So it's not just to show, you know, whether or not these rich people will survive as if they're more important than the rest of us. It's actually to give people some hope that, hey, you don't have to be rich. In fact, the core philosophy behind preparedness is self-reliance. It's living within your means. It's having enough. It's understanding that the best things in life are free. That doesn't mean you don't try to grow and you try to become successful in all aspects of life. But it's just to say that, you know, when everything hits the fan, then it's almost the great equalizer in a way. It's the great reset in the purest of ways, because then you'll have no excuse. If we go Mad Max, and 10 months from Mad Max, you're still struggling and you're still kicking rocks and you're still complaining about the system and blah, 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 that's on you, all right? So we're going to do some interesting things with that series, and I think you guys are going to enjoy it. I hope you're going to enjoy it. If you want anybody to be rated, or if you think that we should rank somebody using our system, which is far more sophisticated than we can perhaps encapsulate in a 1 minute short. YouTube only gives us 59 seconds, so we're condensing a lot of information in that 59 seconds. But if you have somebody you would like us to rank, leave it in the comment section below, okay? Now, in terms of what's going on in North Korea, I'm just going to read you what the North Korean defense minister said. He said that nuclear war on the Korean peninsula is no longer a question of whether it will be, but a question of who will start it and when. The nuclear war mania by the United States and the proxies in the Republic of Korea is turning the Korean peninsula and the Northeast Asia into a new hotbed of nuclear war. Okay? So this is different than a lot of the previous statements, and there's a lot of other data points to factor in as to why they are saying this now. For starters, in days gone by, and we'll talk about all the points of escalation. Number one, North Korea did a record amount of missile tests last year. Tensions on the Korean peninsula are at an all-time high since the Korean War. You have American nuclear subs parked in South Korea right now. You have the leaders of Japan, South Korea, and Japan meeting at Camp David, of all places. Why Camp David? With Joe Biden this Friday. Okay, now this is important because what happens next week is why North Korea is making this statement today. And that's that they're starting another 10-day military exercise that's going to be kicked off with a civil defense drill that is going to see millions of South Koreans all descend into their bunkers at the same time when they get the emergency message. It's going to be an exercise. When they get the emergency message on their phone, that's their cue to get into the bunkers. Now, a lot can go wrong here. It shouldn't take a stretch of the imagination to understand that North Korea could misinterpret this, in fact, as being an invasion plan. Think about it. You're going to meet with Joe Biden at Camp David. I presume that's a military base, you know, just a week before this massive exercise is about to start. They have nuclear weapons parked right outside the Korean, like right off the Korean peninsula. They're going to be doing this massive military drill. They're going to be doing this civil defense drill all at the same time. It starts to look like an invasion. And if you are as paranoid as Kim Jong-un is right now, and you're sitting on more nuclear weapon technology than you ever have before, take a look at what the North Koreans, where are they getting this stuff? You know where they're getting it. They're getting it from China and the Russians. They do not have the infrastructure to build things like this in the most heavily sanctioned country on earth. Where are you going to build a vehicle like that, a launch vehicle like that? The North Koreans are saying that they're going to be getting hundreds of nukes. Now, if North Korea can amass hundreds of nukes, do you really buy this story from the Chinese that it's going to take them till the year 2035 to amass a nuclear arsenal that's on par with the United States and the Russians? Come on. The Chinese are under no obligation to disclose the amount of nuclear weapons that they have. They're in no treaties. Here's Kim right here and all his yes men. And, the North Koreans are building nukes at breakneck speeds. Why is the Americans in there with a nuclear submarine? Do they actually, is there going to be some false flag? I mean, anything goes right now. Anything is possible. And understand that it's not just going to be limited to the Korean Peninsula. They're going to throw up some ICBMs, probably several over the continental United States, over North America, in order to black out the power grid. They have nuclear weapons that are specifically tuned for their electromagnetic pulse effects. That high voltage is going to couple into the power grid. It's going to fry transformers, and it is going to be absolute pandemonium. Now, North Korea will probably be leveled. Whether or not they can get enough of their population to the bunkers in time to rebuild. But if you bomb North Korea, you're getting into a war with China as well. Because North Korea is the vassal of China in the same way that Belarus is the vassal of Russia, in the same way that Poland is a vassal right now, a military vassal of the NATO states in the Americas. Okay? So it's not looking good. There's a lot of things to be concerned about here. Let's hope it just blows over. But North Korea sitting on hundreds of nuclear weapons is never a good thing, okay? The purpose of Biden meeting with the leaders of South Korea and Japan is for the purpose of discussing a joint military exercise that's coming up the week after. It's also to discuss a hotline, okay? And so this is the other point of concern. If you're North Korea and Biden and friends are going to be talking about this red crisis line they're about to put in place a week before they're going to do these civil defense drills and the good old buzzword trilateral partnerships, okay? So it's not looking good. This is a very dangerous state of affairs. I know it just seems like a cartoon and it seems like nothing will ever come of it, but they wouldn't be investing so heavily in this type of equipment if they weren't actually serious about potentially using it at some point in time. And remember, this is going to be a major exercise, this civil defense drill. And it's going to be interesting to see how it goes. It's going to be interesting to see if there's any coverage of this whatsoever. But I guess time will tell. And apparently now things are popping off between the Philippines and China. The Americans are building bases within the Philippines, military bases, and they've cut the red line between Philippines and China. All of these countries have these de-escalation hotlines with one another. Well, now that one has been cut with the Philippines over some spats in the South China Sea, I believe, with the Philippine Coast Guard and the Chinese Coast Guard. So something else to keep an eye on. Things are just going bananas all over the world. China is still reeling from all kinds of climate chaos that is affecting their food supply, so they're going to be digging into those massive coffers of food storage that they've had prepared for this very reality, not in the not so distant future. We also have these clashes in Syria. And this is where we could very well actually see Russians fighting with the Americans first. Okay, we've seen so many close calls in the last few days and weeks with fighter jets, U.S. fighter jets and Russian military aircraft in Syria. It's only a matter of time before somebody accidentally pulls the trigger. Apparently, some American planes locked on to an Su-35 in recent days, and we had another dangerously close brush-in with the Russian military here recently. And of course, this perspective is from TASS, which is Russian state-sponsored media. So it's very likely that the Americans will have an alternate explanation of how this unfolded, but just something to keep in mind. We have numerous fronts: Korea, Taiwan, now the Philippines, Syria, Israel, the Strait of Hormuz with Iran. I'm just hitting the same finger now because I don't have enough fingers to talk about all these. Of course, Ukraine, Africa, and I'm sure there's some stuff going on in South America as well. In terms of what is going on in Ukraine, so we got this military parade going on in Poland to commemorate the war between the Soviet Union and the Poles in 1918. Was it 1918 to 1920? So, you know, it's starting to look like everything is pointing towards Poland is being primed as the next contestant on World War III, the Western Front, okay? So they're sending troops right now, this 10,000 troops that they're deploying towards Belarus. Now, apparently one of the places has historical significance. It's called Brest, and it's not that kind of Brest, guys. I know you like those kind of Brests. This is a different kind of Brest, and this Brest is in the southern part of Belarus. You can go and look it up on a map. It makes no difference. Basically, it's close to the Polish border. Okay, I started thinking about Brest, and all of a sudden, I can't think straight. Go figure. Anyways, haha. Joke of the day. Anyways, this was a place that was historically fought over back in this conflict between the Soviet Union and Poland. So it's almost like history is really just repeating once again, like to a T. And now they're moving troops in that direction, okay? Under the guise of these NATO exercises that they've been conducting recently, and even this military parade that I've long since suspected, I mean, the size of this parade, and in many cases, parades, they're like drills. They're like, it's like marching, you know, in like a drill sergeant almost. That there's a purpose to that. You know, there's a purpose to coordinating all the logistics that go into these parades, moving large convoys of men and material through narrow corridors. These parades are, in effect, an exercise. Now, obviously, they're a flex to put the Russians on notice that, hey, we're ready for you. I've been quite critical of this display, considering that Ukraine right now is struggling and likely could use a lot of this equipment. In fact, this is a testament in and of itself that NATO is just exploiting Ukrainians for their human resources and actually don't care too much about the human sacrifices they're making. Otherwise, all of this equipment that you see here in this military parade would have been there long ago. This idea that they don't have them, they got all these excuses as to why they can send it. No. That's not the reason. It makes no logical sense whatsoever. You can do some mental gymnastics to tell yourself, well, they can't do the F-16s because of this and that. If they really wanted to, all they could say is we put a different pilot in there. The only way they're going to find out, the Russians would find out, is if they, you know, the pilot ejected and maybe he was an American, and then they would just say, well, he was a mercenary that we trained. And it's not like the Russians would nuke them if a pilot was ejected in Russian territory after flying an F-16 and he turned out to be American. So I don't buy any of these excuses. If they truly wanted the Ukrainians to be successful, all of this equipment would be in that country right now, don't you think? So clearly they've known all along that this is just the battleground, and it's going to be, unfortunately, the frontier that is sacrificed for NATO, which they're trying to protect. And it's these guys here who are flexing with all their nice, pristine, and very clean equipment that has never been used. So Yeah, I think that this is like covert war prep. Poland is going into debt in order to pay for all this stuff. They don't have the money for all this stuff. I mean, think about the amount of refugees that they've had to bring into their country. That is putting immense amount of stress on their economy, on the EU's economy as a whole. Yet you're telling me that they just got money to throw around like this and they want to become the biggest superpower? Well, who's funding that? Everybody wants. Who wouldn't want to have a big military this day and age? Why is Poland being chosen next? Well, I think they're the ones who have been selected. They've had their number called, but for the Hunger Games, put it that way. What else do we got going on in the front? Pretty much the same story. Ukraine making some minor breakthroughs, but the Russians were able to successfully get many missiles through recently in one of the largest airstrikes that they conducted thus far in the conflict. And maybe not one of the largest, but one of the most successful. So the Russians are starting to find a way around Ukrainian defense. The Ukrainians are saying they shot down 18 out of 28. Usually they overstate, so we can only assume that it's a lot more that made it through. And I do have video footage that I could show you of the actual effects of this. But, we don't want to hear this guy, do we? Or this girl, I should say. But I can't show it because, YouTube and stuff. And it's actually rare that we would get this footage anyways. I'm quite certain that the person who posted this will be penalized by the Ukrainian government because you're not allowed to show any of the explosions there because they need to control the narrative. National security, right? But the reason why the Russians did this in the first place is because of this. Now, we didn't hear a lot about this on the news, but apparently the Ukrainians had a successful strike on the Crimean Bridge, as evidenced, as anecdotal as it might be, by this satellite footage. So this is showing you July 30th, August 4th, August 13th. Now, if you watch this, you can search this up on the internet. Maybe I'll post a link in the description. You can see that there's definitely a difference come August 13th in that they hit the exact same place again. So they were targeting the same place on the bridge, hoping to further neutralize this bridge. Not only did they hit the civilian traffic corridor, but apparently they also hit the train tracks here. So they were trying to take out both. Maybe a part of the missile hit this or whatever, who knows. So this is why the Russians were so pissed off, allegedly, and I'm just making that connection. Nope, haven't heard anybody else make that connection. I'm sure there are people who are doing it, but this is why they were so pissed off, and they did that massive bombardment yesterday. Now, once again, like clockwork, in response to that, the U.S. has its reconnaissance plane here, the Northrop Grumman RQ-4B, which is doing its rounds in the Black Sea. Typically, a flight like this is going to precede some other Ukrainian attack. Every time that this plane is flying around here, within the next 24 hours, there's some attempt on Crimea or Russian warships in the Black Sea or critical infrastructure there. So you can bet that they're going to try to attack either the bridge or something else there in the not-so-distant future. And, of course, the Russians clearly view this as NATO complicity if the Ukrainians are utilizing NATO intelligence, okay? So this is where the whole, we're not a part of NATO thing kind of falls apart entirely. Apparently there's been some propositions by the person who oversees the office of the chief in NATO. Now, Ukraine has outright rejected this. Basically, he said, look, maybe the only way to get NATO or to get Ukraine into NATO is to cede some territory to the Russians. The Ukrainians said, not a chance. Never going to happen. And in fact, Dmitry Medvedev, it's Tuesday today, so it's not Medvedev Mondays where he utters nuclear threats. But apparently he said that that's not going to work either, because if they do cede territory, they're going all the way to Kiev because the objective of the Russians is to demilitarize. Now, they're not going to go into Lviv because they historically view that as a Polish territory. And at least this is, I'm not an expert in this area, but as far as I know, they view that as that the Russians are fine with Western Ukraine being unaffiliated with the Russian Empire. But Medvedev basically just signaled that they will be going all the way to Kiev. Now, it's important to understand that there are still, and there have been, people within Ukraine who supported the pro-Russian government there in the past, Viktor Yanukovych. But we're not going to go into the history of all this, but there likely is large amounts of sleeper cells, people who are just waiting because the Russians know that eventually they're going to have to put people within these communities into positions of power if they make it that far. If they make it to Kiev and they oust the current government, they're going to have to put in people. So you can bet that there's probably people within Ukraine right now who are waiting till it's safe enough to emerge and to sign up to be a part of this pro-Russian puppet government. If it gets to that point, I'm not saying it's going to get to that point, I'm just viewing it from that perspective. It's very likely that neither side is going to, I mean, ideally in a perfect world, you would just split it along the river, right? And then maybe Kiev is like the borderlands or something. I mean, from a geographical standpoint, that's what you would do, but it appears as though Poland is really ramping up preparations. And if you were Belarus, you would likely interpret a lot of the different maneuver that is happening on that border as being provocative and indicative of a pending invasion. Now, I think they're far from that yet, but they're ratcheting it up the tension and they're bolstering their forces very incrementally on the border. The Belarusians will see this as an insidious move, no doubt. What else do we have to talk about today? We have fires raging in France. Fires from Maui to all over Canada to France to Portugal. We had a massive blackout, and this one is in Texas. This is a peat fire. I've never seen a peat fire before. I'm going to presume it's probably a common occurrence, but Texas is another place that's seeing record temperatures right now. Let's take a look at the map. Anywhere in red is dead. Not quite, but so you can see Europe right now. Europe has had actually a fairly cool summer, but not anymore. It's starting to get hot there, and it's definitely heating up on the East Coast, all around the coast, in fact, except in the Midwest here where it's lower than average temperatures. But this is part of the reason why it has been record temperatures up here in Northwest Territories where the big fires are burning right now. So that is up here. You could see the size of these fires burning. It's no joke. A lot of the smoke is not making its way down to the United States because the jet stream is not working in that direction right now. I'm sure there is still some making it down there. And as you can see, in the coming days ahead, there will be some pretty nasty air quality, at least around the Great Lakes, certainly where I'm at, and some cities in central Canada. But it's not looking good. So, just more of the same. I mean, it's pretty much a daily occurrence. The spokesperson for the SBU is trying to say that the Russians are planning a false flag attack at Kursk nuclear power plant. I mean, at this point, whatever. The false flag is really the claim of the false flag at this point. Now, imagine you're watching the movie Don't Look Up, and you go up for a smoke, and you see this in the sky. Well, this took place, where did this take place? In India, okay? Could you imagine watching that movie? There was some guy in India who just finished watching that movie, went outside for a smoke, and he looked up, and he's seen this asteroid breaking up in the atmosphere. Absolutely insane. Absolutely insane. You just never know when our number is going to be up, folks. So keep on prepping. But how do you prep for an asteroid? You really can't. What else do we got to talk about today? We talked about the close brushing in Syria. Michael Burry shorting the market, bets against the S&P and NASDAQ. Got to represent Burry. The Bears, one for the Bears. This ain't no place for the Bulls if you haven't figured that out yet. Yeah, he thinks that the stock market is going to crash because it is wildly overvalued. I mean, it is still as overvalued as it was after 1929 or before 1929. So all the more reason to get into gold. I mean, I was talking to a gold expert today. We're going to release the video in a few days. And I can tell you that the true price of gold is so much greater than they make it out to be. They want to keep the price of gold as low as possible so the central banks can load up on it. But the truth of the matter is that the supply of gold is diminishing in the world. There's going to be less and less of it mined every year. The demand for gold is increasing. And moreover, the ROI on gold mining is declining. So the amount of money that it costs in order to mine gold has increased significantly. So all the low-hanging fruits have been picked. Gold, oil, commodities, they only have one way to go, in my personal opinion, in the long game, and that's up. But that's not financial advice. Speaking of financial advice, though, we're being lied to. I was going to do a dedicated video on this, and I got to give full credit to this channel right here, the Shikaz family. This is a guy from Russia, and very apolitical channel, doesn't talk about the conflict. I hope YouTube hasn't penalized them just for being in Russia. But he took his family to the grocery store, and he's showing us what you can buy for rubles. Now, you see here how it says $24.99, right? Well, that's rubles. So it's basically 25 rubles. Now, $1 US dollar equals 100 rubles. So with $1 US dollar, you can buy 4 of whatever this is. 4, I don't know, potatoes or whatever it is, okay? You can actually buy more than that. That's the weight. But he goes, and I'm going to link to this video in the description because it's very important for people to understand. Right now, you're hearing all this talk about how the Russian economy is collapsing. But $1 in Russia, I might have to do a dedicated video on this because I was taking notes. For $1, you can buy a loaf of bread, a container of milk, a thing of butter, and what was it? There was something else. A banana. For $1, you can eat a breakfast for $1. A loaf of bread is 25 cents, the equivalent of 25 cents in Russia. You know how much gas is in France right now? You know, France, they have such a high standard of living, right? You know, not like those backwoods Ruskies. $2.66 per gallon. Just kidding. $2.66 per liter. You know how much a liter of gas is in Russia? Probably about 50 cents, the equivalent. 50 cents. 5 times the amount in France. And we have the audacity to think that our quality of life is better. Now, sure, they might make a little less there, but proportionally speaking, the amount of disposable income that you have living in Moscow is much greater than it is in our cities. And a lot of this has to do with imports, exports. I'm not an economist for the reasons as to why things are domestically so cheap within Russia. But of course, those same rubles are not going to be able to buy a lot of stuff outside of Russia, which they probably don't care anyways because they're sanctioned to all hell. But it just goes to show that we're paying way more for stuff here. The cost of living in Canada and the United States and the West in general, never mind those countries like Switzerland and Luxembourg or whatever, those places are just, I mean, I don't know how they can, I guess they still say the quality of life is better, but, you know, and there's all these, the Russians don't have flush toilets and they're using the chips from the washing machine, blah, blah, blah. It's all bullshit. We're being lied to. Do not be beguiled by the media to believe what's going on over there, okay? We've been brainwashed into thinking that this that what we have here is better. I can tell you right now, the province I live in, the construction is terrible. It takes them 6 months to build anything, but there's still people here who stubbornly think that this is the best place to live in the world. It isn't. Now, I'm not saying that, and I don't even say that from like an anti-nationalist perspective. I just, objectively know that we suck at a lot of things. And as a country, as a continent who has everything we need to be paying so much for food, so much for gas and all this stuff, it's preposterous. All of these countries we view and lump into the axis of evil, whether it's Iran, Russia. A lot of these places, they don't have near the amount of tax that we do. They don't have near the amount of costs and proportion of their wealth that is used for daily fixed expenses. So this is something for you to go and consider, and go and check out this video. And the thing is, he's talking about the ruble collapse. So that's why YouTube is pumping the video, because, it makes Russia look bad, right? But inadvertently, he's showing you how cheap things there in spite of that collapse. In spite of the collapse, you can still buy 4 loaves of bread for $1, for the equivalent of $1. Now you might say to yourself, well, yeah, you take that American dollar and you take it to Mexico, or you take it to some African country and you could live like a king too. And that is true. But in Moscow, as far as I can tell, they're as modernized as we are. You go through this grocery store, in many ways, there's more modern features in a lot of these places. So they're not inhibited with the massive amounts of bureaucracy that we have here that get in the way. Not the bad kind of bureaucracy, the kind that is just bloat. Not that good old communist style bureaucracy that's more efficient, right? At processing the people. That's a joke. Don't take it too seriously, folks. We got a civil war starting, apparently. Trump gonna be indicted now. Oh, what the hell is this? Hey, get that off the screen. Get that off the screen. Yeah, we gotta pretend you didn't see that, guys. Pretend you didn't see that. RFK did not say that. Now, if that was true, what he said, think about that. Think about that. Bioweapons? I made a video about that in the past, and I was very surprised because that video, this was way before COVID. I was predicting COVID for years and years and years. Me. No, seriously, go back and watch my old videos. One of my oldest videos is the coming great pandemic. Anyways, I did a video about the potential for bio weapons. Can't say the word, don't want to trigger anything on the algorithm here. But it just got downranked. Like, oddly, it didn't get any attention whatsoever. And I thought at the time, I felt that this was a pretty thought-provoking video, had a good thumbnail, good title. And there are many people who believe that with the new technology coming out now, it's going to be so easy for somebody of modest means to engineer a virus, and that the government is going to have to put some sort of restriction, or there's going to have to be some real tight regulations on who has access to this stuff. And this is beyond just the biolab stuff. Just to think that countries are really trying to make these genetically engineered weapons that are genetically tuned to attack a certain race of people, a certain ethnicity, people who share maybe one common gene that makes their eyes look a certain way that's different, slightly unique than somebody else. And so with the CRISPR technology and the gene editing and all that stuff, we're entering a very, very dangerous world. Never before have we had so many different ways to destroy ourselves. Whether it was the climate chaos that is ensuing, whether it's the nuclear war, the ability to destroy ourselves with nuclear weapons, the ability to bioengineer viruses that can wipe out huge amounts of people, the ability of so much of our population to be dependent on the power grid and the electrical supply and different cyber weapons in order to take that power supply out. So these are very precarious times. You cannot be a historian and try to understand the unprecedented times that we are living in. And the same goes with the banking system, the financial collapse that is impending. Anyways, people of Yellowknife, I hope that the fires can be held at bay. Apparently there is a state of emergency. The military is en route. I must keep showing this graph because this is just unbelievable. This is out of this world. The amount of fire activity this year is just absolutely insane. Did I talk about Trump's indictment, his other indictment? He claims to say that he is going to be liberated of all charges. But if he doesn't, we're going to see. Are people actually going to act? And are people going to, is there going to be a civil war? I guess we're going to find out. I think I've rambled on long enough. I've given you a lot to chew on. I'll give you one more thing. So Russia has been contemplating restarting nuclear testing up here in a place called Novaya Zemlya, where they've done over 130 nuclear tests throughout the Cold War. And apparently they are testing right now their Burevestnik nuclear-capable missile. Now, if you don't know what this is, I believe it's also called Skyfall. It has the nickname Skyfall. David Pine was on here and he talked about it. Is a Russian experimental nuclear-powered, nuclear-armed cruise missile under development. This missile has an essentially unlimited range. So imagine a missile that they put it up when things are getting a little tense and it just flies around and it just waits. It just waits to be directed to its target. The Burevestnik is one of 6 new Russian strategic weapons unveiled. Among those are the Zircon, the Kinzhal hypersonic missiles, the Sarmat system, the Poseidon, and I can't remember what the other one is. It might be, one is sea to surface, one is air to surface, that's the Kinzhal, maybe another surface to surface hypersonic, I'm not sure. But anyway, so the Russians are planning strategically, and if the Poles make a move into Western Ukraine, this is why the Russians are holding so much of their force in reserve right now, and they're trying to attrit the Ukrainians, hoping that the Ukrainians will break, knowing that NATO's next plan is to get Poland involved in some way, which they are only loosely affiliated with NATO, possibly the Baltic states as well. Let me know what you guys think about that in the comments section below. I guess we're going to find out if we're still here in a week's time when the showdown in North Korea happens. Let's hope nobody has an itchy trigger finger next week, because I've never heard rhetoric quite like this before. And it's not only that we've never heard it before, it's that now they have the capability. This isn't 10 years ago when it was theory and maybe they had one missile. We're talking about they're now going to have dozens of nuclear missiles. And if you think that this is not going to quickly evolve beyond the Korean Peninsula, then think again. Have a plan, because the elites certainly do. Thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Canadian Prepper out.